one problem we don't have in wheat, Brian, is soybean cyst nematodes. That's a big issue for soybean farmers across the country, and it's really growing. It's spreading throughout the area, and also the races of nematodes present are starting to adapt to some of the practices we're using. We'll talk about soybean cyst nematodes today and what you can do to protect your farm.
Okay, so if you haven't had a problem with cyst nematodes in the past, that does not mean you're not going to have a problem in the future, because these nematodes seem to move around not just on equipment, not just on custom combines or things that you commonly hear about. I mean, there are a number of ways that these things can move. And in addition to that, even though you may not have had problems, there may have been some nematodes already in your field. Well, if they get under just the right conditions, what you'll end up with a lot of times is hot spots in fields.
Well, that is one of the frustrating things with nematodes is they are in these hot spots, and it's difficult for farmers to know, well, when do I start treating or not? I got one little spot out in my field.
Yep.
Or if you're out trying to soil sample and get nematode samples.
Right there. That's what really frustrates me, is the soil sampling part of this whole thing. With nematodes, you go out and you can pull a sample, and you're in a field that you know has had problems. You pull a sample and it comes up with almost no nematodes. And you say, well, that can't be right. So how do you get the right test? How do you really actually know you have nematodes?
Well, it's one of those things where you really have to watch your fields, and during the season, when nematodes are bad, you can see it on the crop, but most of the time, you don't even notice it on the crop, especially on a year where you get plentiful moisture. The crop's gonna grow good even though you have nematode issues. It won't show up until the yield map in the fall.
All right, let's talk about how to control cyst nematodes, or at least how to manage them well. The first thing that you can do is not plant soybeans. So on this particular field right behind me, it's been about 10 years continuous corn. It's going to go to soybeans next year. I'm going to guess there's not going to be a soybean cyst nematode problem there.
Well, I would say you're pretty safe in that, Brian, but here's the issue now. You can rotate to other crops, but what if you're in an area where, hey, all I have is corn and soybeans in my area. There's no grain buyers for anything else. That's all I have equipment for. I want to stay corn and soybeans.
Well, hey, but even if you are just staying corn and soybeans, and let's say you go 2 years corn, 1 year soybeans, that does not mean all the nematodes are gone. The numbers just dwindle as the years go on.
So let's just work around a scenario of, okay, I'm going to plant soybeans, even if it's occasionally, or maybe it's an every other year kind of thing. What can I do for them? Well, the first thing you can do is plant a nematode-resistant soybean. Now, when you talk about nematode-resistant beans, it's not a Bt protein that's going to kill things when they take a bite or anything like that. All that nematode-resistant beans do is they don't put quite as much of the signal out that triggers those nematodes to hatch and basically come out of their cyst and start being an active worm. There's still going to be some nematodes out there, just the population is going to be a lot lower than if you planted a susceptible variety.
Okay, but you say a nematode-resistant variety. There are different types of nematode-resistant varieties.
Well, kind of. I guess there are a few different sources of nematode resistance. However, most of the soybeans planted in the United States all use that Fayette gene, or the PI 88.788.
Okay, so that may be the most popular one, but there are others.
Well, there are other ones. The problem is they just haven't gotten them into the best yielding genetics, because if it yields 5 bushels less, well, no farmer's going to plant it. Why would I lose $50 or $60 an acre just so my nematode counts look a little better?
Right.
That doesn't make any sense.
Okay, in terms of other methods of control, today there's a new biological product that's come out from Bayer that it seems to have some degree of success there.
Well, Votivo looks like a promising product. It repels nematodes away from the roots. It keeps them away from the roots and protects the plant that way. As far as yield gain that we saw on independent trials this summer, we saw as a whole about a bushel benefit using Votivo, and that's using it anywhere. So even the guys that don't have nematodes, we're using Votivo, and the guys that do have nematodes, as Brian mentioned before, a lot of times they're just maybe a few hot spots in the field. Where we targeted just those hot spots, we saw pretty good gains. On whole fields where we had nematodes, we saw about a 2 bushel gain. On hot spots in fields, we saw as much as 5 or even 10 bushel gain in those hot spots. But I would say this, Votivo is not good enough that you can say, well, I'm going to plant a non-resistant variety, put it in a terrible environment. I'm just going to put Votivo on. I don't think Votivo is that good that it's going to take the place of a resistant variety.
Well, like we said, it's very important to control other stresses in addition to cyst nematode if you want to have good success out in your fields. And one of those stresses you need to stop is our Weed of the Week. We'll tell you what it is coming up next.